Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's NFER webinar, TIMSS 2019 in Northern Ireland, recognising successes and identifying priorities for school improvement in mathematics and science. The national report for TIMSS 2019 in Northern Ireland was published back in December 2020. This webinar will review the TIMSS 2019 national results, celebrate successes and identify any lessons for school improvement going forward. Just a little housekeeping note, if you have any technical issues during the event today, then please message the host in your chat function in the bottom right-hand part of your screen. I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm Bethan Burge, a Research Director at NFER, and I've worked on international large-scale assessments such as TIMSS for nearly 2 decades. I've seen over the years how the data collected by these surveys can be used to inform educational policy and debate, allowing us to look beyond our own country to explore how pupils perform and education is delivered all around the world, providing the educational community with insights into our shared goals as well as the unique challenges facing us as individual countries. So if you join me, I'd like to thank our speakers and panellists for joining us today. Our participants from NFER are Dr. David Thomas, the National Research Coordinator for TIMSS Northern Ireland. From Northern Ireland, we have Dr. Mark Brown, Permanent Secretary, Department of Education. Karen McCulloch, Director of Curriculum Qualification and Standards, Department of Education. Faustina Graham, Chief Inspector, Education and Training Inspectorate. Maura Gorman, Education and Training Inspectorate. And finally, Lynn Lynch, SEN and Primary Programme Manager for the Council for the Curriculum, Examination and Assessment. I'll just take you briefly through the format of this afternoon's webinar. So we'll start off with an introduction from Dr. Mark Brown, and then Faustina Graham will join us with some opening remarks. Then we'll move on to our presentation of findings from Dr. David Thomas, and then we'll finish with a question and answer session for our panellists. We're really keen for you to ask questions and make any contributions you need to throughout. We'll be using the chat panel for this, and the panel options, as I said, are available in the bottom right of your screen. Our colleague from NFER, Rachel Classic, will be monitoring questions and will share them with me as the chair. So please directly send the questions for the speakers to the host for discussion during the Q&A. We ask you to keep the questions brief so that we can get through as many as possible during the event. And just a brief reminder that we're recording this session, so it will be available once we've finished. Okay, so without further hesitation, I'll hand over to Dr. Mark Brown, Permanent Secretary, Department of Education, for his introduction. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Bethan. It's a real pleasure, not long after having come back to the Department of Education as Permanent Secretary, to be able to be here today to talk about and listen to the findings of the TIMSS study. I'm looking forward to, over the coming months, to meeting with many of you who are on the call today and learning more about your schools and the challenges you face. However, it would be wrong not to reflect a little on the circumstances in which we meet today. During the last year, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought truly unprecedented challenges. Never before has our education system witnessed such disruption. And the efforts of our schools to deliver remote learning and to support our children as they return to the classroom have been truly outstanding. I know that many of you have gone above and beyond what could reasonably be expected. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for the hard work and the professionalism and the commitment in these difficult times. I know your emphasis at present is rightly on reassuring children and their parents. Undoubtedly, one of the most significant consequences of school closures has been the lack of social development that comes with being part of the school community. As all of our primary children return to the classroom this week, you're supporting them to reconnect socially, to build positive relationships, to play and to engage with learning. And there can be no more important task in our society. And as you well know, children have had very different home experiences during recent months. And I want to reassure you that the department recognises the need to provide funding and support to schools as they work to identify and limit the long-term impact of the current disruption. In particular, the Minister intends to bring forward to the Executive proposals for a further year of the Engage programme. Undoubtedly, however, this period has provided some opportunities as well as many challenges. The integration of information technology in education has been rapidly accelerated by recent events. And the pace at which our schools have adapted and embraced these new technologies has been really impressive. The period of school closures has also begun to open important questions about what high quality education should look like in the 21st century. And these include the role of technology to support education delivery and pedagogy, the focus of learning, what are children learning, how and for what purpose, an emphasis on skills for an unpredictable world, such as communication, collaboration, informed decision making, creative problem solving and adaptability, alongside empathy and emotional intelligence. And finally, questions about the role of the educator in the 21st century as a facilitator of development rather than a source of knowledge. For our part in the department, we know we haven't always got it right. We too have faced unprecedented challenges and have been learning and adapting alongside you. However, I give you my assurance that the department is committed to listening carefully to your concerns, learning from recent events, both locally and internationally, and working with you in the weeks and months ahead to continue to improve as we hopefully return to more normal times. But it's fantastic that during such a busy and a hectic week that you find time to participate in today's event. For me, it underlines the extent of your commitment to professional learning and development. The focus today is our international performance. As you know, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, or TIMSS for short, compares the attainment of our Year 6 pupils with 58 countries internationally. The study is designed to capture the breadth and richness of these subjects as they are taught at the participating countries. And our performance in TIMSS 2019 is truly outstanding. In maths, we were the highest performers in Europe and the 7th highest performing country in the world. We also performed significantly above the international average in primary science. And I know that colleagues today will analyse these outcomes in greater depth, highlighting the key strengths and the important areas for further development. I would simply reflect that these results build on past successes and are evidence of our truly world-class primary education system. And they're also testament to our highly qualified and our dedicated teaching workforce and to the high-quality teaching and learning in our primary schools. So I take this opportunity to particularly thank and congratulate the schools and the pupils who participated in TIMSS 2019. As you may or may not be aware, the Department of Education's vision is for an education system that is recognised internationally for the quality of its teaching and learning, for the achievements of its young people, and for a holistic approach to education. And the consistently excellent international performance of our primary pupils in maths, science, and also in reading show that you as school leaders are delivering this vision. Studies such as TIMSS give us unique insights into how our education system is performing internationally and make a special contribution to the development of our understanding of what works in education and what schools can do to help people succeed. Successful school systems have many internal measures, but without greater international context, it's difficult to understand what the best really looks like. So international benchmarks show what is truly possible in education and inform the development of our education policy. Before concluding today, I'd just like to draw your attention to another international study, Progress in International Reading Literacy, or PIRLS 2021. And this study looks at the attainment of pupils in reading. Our performance in PIRLS in 2016 was excellent, with only 2 countries significantly outperforming pupils here. And recruitment for this study began in January 2021 and has been very successful to date. However, due to the ongoing public health situation, the Minister has decided to postpone the school fieldwork stage for PIRLS until September and October 2021. So pupils currently in Year 6 will now be assessed at the beginning of Year 7. A number of other countries internationally have also chosen to postpone until September, including England and the Republic of Ireland. We believe it will give pupils in schools an opportunity to return to more normal operation prior to the study taking place. I know that these are exceptionally difficult and uncertain times, and that demands on your time have never been higher. However, without your participation, we will lose this important opportunity to benchmark ourselves internationally and to learn more about how to support and develop our system. We believe it's extremely important that Northern Ireland continues to participate in international studies, but this is dependent on your support and your participation. So I would therefore encourage you, if you are selected, please take part in PIRLS 2021. In conclusion, over the past year, you've worked to overcome unprecedented challenges, delivering remote learning, and now supporting our children as they return to school. I look forward, as circumstances improve, to working with you all on the many challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. But today is about TIMSS and the international comparisons that brings. And today will hopefully provide an opportunity to learn more about how we are doing internationally. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the seminar, and I'll now hand back to Bethan.
Thank you very much, Mark. And now to follow on with some opening remarks, Faustina Graham, Chief Inspector.
Thank you, Bethan, and good afternoon, everyone. And as Bethan said, I'm Faustina Graham and I'm Chief Inspector of the Education and Training Inspectorate. And like our Permanent Secretary, this is my first opportunity to talk to many of you since taking up post at the end of last term. So rather than repeat anything that Mark has said, I just want to endorse his comments in relation to both the commitment and the professionalism of all of our teachers, and also to emphasise the key strengths in our system. And I believe those key strengths actually leave us well placed to address our current challenges. What I do want to acknowledge also is that the tremendous achievement of both you and all of your pupils in this international study was set against a fairly turbulent backdrop of action short of strike, when as a system I think we were somewhat at odds with each other for a fairly sustained period of time. So I think it's really timely that today we have an opportunity to both celebrate your success and also to begin, with the help of our colleagues from NFER, to renew our professional discussions on what constitutes high quality learning in both maths and science, and indeed across the curriculum. I think we have through TIMSS not just a fantastic outcome for Northern Ireland, but also a really rich source of detailed baseline evidence. So we have assessment of and assessment for learning contained all within that study. And I think that collectively we can use that evidence to inform maths and science teaching, as all of us in our various roles, and as Mark has outlined, grapple with the best ways to approach the future. One of the headline figures that caught my eye was the comparison between performance in maths and science, and also a potential correlation between time allocated to a particular discipline and then the outcomes attained in that discipline. And of course, we all know as educationalists that nothing is actually that simple or as simple as it sometimes looks. But I draw your attention to it today because for me, the key consideration at every level of our system as we look to the future will be about effective curriculum design. So when we think about things like time allocated, should we be more prescriptive about time? And my policy colleagues from DE who have organised this webinar are lobbied on a weekly basis about just that, about prescription. The amount of time that lots of people think every school should be required to spend on a whole range of topics, not just individual areas of learning. And I think, to be fair, sometimes prescription is very tempting, because I think making decisions for your school and for your class and for each and every child in front of you, particularly in our current circumstances, can potentially be overwhelming. I think every one of us have the days when we think, look, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. On the other hand, an ETI report on initial teacher education just before Christmas said that in initial teacher education, too much time was being devoted to literacy and numeracy at the expense of the other areas of learning. So there I've given you two very different views. And I believe in looking at the future that it is only by embracing the flexibility of our statutory curriculum that each school will be able to truly customise learning to the needs of their individual pupils. Reflecting again on what Mark has already touched on what constitutes excellent education systems. But either way, whether it's prescriptive, whether it's flexible, what we do know is that the answers as to how classroom practice and the shaping of the curriculum will evolve can only come from the teaching profession. and in recognising that huge responsibility that each and every teacher carries for the children in their care, I want to give you the assurance this afternoon that everything we do in ETI will be geared to supporting you in finding and in defining those answers that you seek. I know everyone will be very disappointed to hear that inspection on an individual school basis continues to be paused. I can hear the disappointment as I speak. But what I do want to say to you is that over the next few months, what I want is for my team of district inspectors to have the opportunity to work alongside you, to learn with you and to learn from you what is working in your individual schools and what is working in relation to things like remote and blended learning, emotional health and well-being, curriculum design. Are we spending too much time on literacy and numeracy at the expense of, in this instance, the world around us? And also, what is the value of programmes that we've introduced, for example, like Engage? Hopefully, in the Inspectorate, we can support you by being able to articulate at system level and to our policy colleagues and also to our Minister what you are discovering at individual school level, to ensure that what you are learning as you learn it can be captured and can be brought to bear on the future of education policy. What TIMSS reminds us of is that the strength of the professionalism, the commitment and expertise of our teachers set in an international context has been consistent over a considerable period of time. And reassuringly, coupled with that expertise is, as the study has shown, that thirst and quest for even more knowledge and more professional learning opportunities. So as we do move into the unknown territory of the future, I think it's hugely important for us all to remember that what TIMSS has confirmed for us is that the skills we require to face that future are right here in this audience today. And if we can continue to work collectively to harness those skills, then the children in our schools may experience something in the future that looks a little bit different from what it has looked like before, but that all of us are confident in saying is still a high quality, effective education. I'm going to stop there, and I said earlier though that we would take all the help we can get and all the support we can get in the work that we all want to do. And in that vein, I'm going to introduce Dr. David Thomas, who is the National Research Coordinator for TIMSS Northern Ireland. And David is from the National Foundation for Educational Research and is joining us this afternoon to go through all of the detail of the findings from TIMSS. David, you are very welcome to our webinar, and on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to say we're looking forward to hearing the detail of your presentation. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Faustina. I'm looking forward very much to present this. I'm just going to, hopefully I've got this right, share my screen, which and just click on. Give me a second for getting the correct views. That's what I want. Right, apologies for that. Right, hopefully you can see the first slide on there, which is my introductory slide. And just to introduce myself, my name is David Thomas, and I'm the, as Faustina has said, the National Research Coordinator for TIMSS 2019 in Northern Ireland. And that really means I sort of work at the centre of a very large team of people at NFER who've been involved in delivering all of the aspects in TIMSS, from developing the papers that go out to students, to sending them out to schools, to administering them in schools, to marking the papers that come back, to doing analysis and writing the reports on there. So it's been quite a big operation over several years to coordinate all of this and produce the results that we're going to present today. Now, in addition to that role, I also have to confess to having been a science teacher for 10 years before I worked at NFER. So as well as having sort of a real interest in the results from the academic NFER side, I also have a strong interest from the classroom practitioner angle on the results. And I think that's a really important aspect, that these don't become an international study that sits in a report somewhere, but that it's something that hopefully will feed into real teaching practice and real lessons for the classroom. So I'm really happy to lead you through these TIMSS results and sort of recognise the successes that you've made, but also identifying some of those potential priorities that might help school improvement going forward. So before we start, a little bit of background on TIMSS. Mark did sort of say what it stood for, which is the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. It's a study that's performed every 4 years, and it's performed to the international 4th grade and 8th grade students. So the 4th grade is year 10 pupils, which includes the year 6 in Northern Ireland, and the 8th grade is about 14-year-old pupils, which Northern Ireland and some other countries don't participate in. So I'm only going to talk about the 4th grade results in this presentation. But it is applied to a lot of countries all over the world. 58 countries participated, as was mentioned, and it's organised and coordinated by the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement, which thankfully reduced their name to just the IEA. They're an organisation based in Amsterdam and Hamburg, and they coordinate a number of these international large-scale assessments. And particularly in the TIMSS, they're helped by the TIMSS and Pearls International Study Centre based in Boston College in the USA, which helped to develop the resources. They developed the science and maths questions and the questionnaires that is sat as part of the study. So in our world, we call these studies ILSAs, or International Large Scale Assessments, and I've included this slide which from IEA, which describes the TIMSS 2019 study, and I think represents the truly large scale of the operation that's required behind a study like this. So the TIMSS 2019 study gathered information from about 580,000 students, 19,000 school principals, and therefore presumably about 19,000 schools, 52,000 teachers, and 310,000 parents of those pupils from 64 different countries if we look at participation at the 4th grade and the 8th grade. And that's a very big operation, which is why it's a sort of 4-year cycle of doing it. This is the 7th cycle of TIMSS that has been completed. So as well as having a lot of that data from this study internationally for 1 year, there is also important data going back 24 years, all the way back to 1997, when the first TIMSS study was conducted. In Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland's participation in TIMSS dates back to 2011, and it's the 3rd time that you've participated, as I've said, at the 4th grade, at the 9 to 10 age group, which equates to the year 6 in Northern Ireland. In addition to that, as Mark mentioned, that Northern Ireland has also participated in the Progress in Reading and Literacy study, or PEARLS. That's a related study looking at obviously literacy that also comes out of the IEA, and so the two of them do sit together somewhat. And that was performed in Northern Ireland in 2011, 2016, and as Mark said, is now moving forward, going to be held in 2021. NFER have worked with the Department for Education in Northern Ireland on all of these studies, and through them we've developed a lot of expertise and interest in the primary education sector in Northern Ireland. So to look at the Northern Ireland participation, this slide shows the level of commitment of schools in Northern Ireland to the TIMSS studies. In total, in TIMSS 2019, 3,497 pupils from 134 schools each participated. They completed 2 science and maths assessments. Each assessment is about 36 minutes long, contains half maths, half science questions. They then have a break and then they do the second assessment. And each student completed a pupil questionnaire. For each of the schools, the principal and a total of 239 classroom teachers also completed questionnaires that feed into the study. And 1,842 parents also assisted by completing an early learning questionnaire on the educational development of their children. As the national coordinator for this study, I'd really like to thank all participants for their help in this. It really is a big commitment from schools. We really do appreciate that. And as Christina said, it has been some difficult times to ask that commitment from you. But without that commitment, we wouldn't really be able to produce the depth and breadth of really important information and the lessons that we can learn that I'm going to outline today. So I'd hopefully like to be able to get over to you the benefits of taking part and exactly what we've learned about the Northern Ireland education system through your participation, which we greatly value. So let's start with what we've learned about the performance of Northern Ireland pupils in mathematics. So initially this slide may not make as much sense, but it gives us the title here that, and if you can see my pointer there, that Northern Ireland has an average scale score of 566. But I think we need to sort of unpack that and interpret a bit what that means. The score is calculated from a sort of an ability measure. Effectively, we're looking at the results of all of the students in all of the countries and working out what that means for their ability, trying to sort of balance up the differences between countries in terms of the number of the sampling and the number of pupils that participate. And they produce an ability score with an average centre point score of 500. So the TIMSS scale centre point is 500, but we can think of that as being the international average that we're comparing to. So any score above 500 means you're performing above that international average. A score below 500 would be below that international average. What we can see here, this image shows the top 10 of the countries, with Northern Ireland highlighted here with the score of 566. And all of these countries are significantly above the international average, which is what the upward arrows there mean. And also, of course, as has been already mentioned, there are only 6 countries ranked above Northern Ireland in this table for performance of maths at grade 4. So that's very good performance. But another important point when interpreting these results is that although we're giving score and we talk about ranks, when we're looking at the results, we're aware that there's what's called statistical uncertainty. It's not that we're uncertain of the results, but because the scale score is based on a sample of schools from which there's a sample of pupils in each country, and those pupils sit a sample of the available questions, then it's not an absolute measure that we're measuring of the performance. And because of that, if you look on this scale at the bottom, the actual scale score in the graph section here is presented as a bar rather than a single point. And the reason for that, that's sort of saying, if we'd sampled a slightly different set of pupils, we might have had a slightly different score. And this gives what's the 95% confidence limit. In other words, we're 95% confident that the score lies within that. That's fair enough, because the only way to be more precise would be to sample effectively all of the pupils in all of the countries. And that definitely would be a big commitment that we're not prepared to do. So we accept this level of uncertainty in these results. But what that does mean is that I won't talk so much about the exact ranking of countries, but I will talk about whether the difference in performance of countries is significant or not. And by that we mean, do the black sections of the bars, do they overlap with each other? If they overlap, then the countries have similar performance, which you can see here, I think, between Northern Ireland and the Russian Federation, for example. And if there's a gap between them, they're significantly different. So you will hear me talk about significance and difference rather than absolute ranking in terms of the position of each country in these scores. So taking this into account, we can compare Northern Ireland's score on the scale to that of other participants. And you can see again, Northern Ireland there is here in the middle at the top row. And there are 5 countries that perform significantly better than Northern Ireland in grade 4 mathematics. And all of these are the top achieving East Asian countries, which are Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, Chinese Taipei and Japan. And all of them actually, as it says in this graphic from the IEA TIMSS, that there's a substantial margin, a substantial gap between them and everyone else. What's brilliant about that is Northern Ireland is immediately below that gap. Northern Ireland therefore achieved a very similar score to the Russian Federation, and we can't separate them even though the score is slightly different. So we say that actually Northern Ireland's score is similar to that of the Russian Federation, but actually Northern Ireland's score was significantly better than the other 51 participating countries in grade 4 mathematics. And that includes England and the Republic of Ireland, which are the next 2 countries below that level of performance, as well as all of these other countries here. The performance of a country in TIMSS can also be tracked over time because we have that historical data from previous results of different cycles. As I've said, Northern Ireland participated in TIMSS from 2011. So we have 3 results from 2011, 2015 and 2019 on this graph. And as you can see, that high level of maths achievement has been very stable across those 3 cycles in which Northern Ireland has participated. There are no significant differences between those scores. Effectively, on that measurement, we can say that the scores have been the same. And note, there's also been no significant differences in the performance of girls and boys at maths. And that shows that Northern Ireland has a very gender equal, if we like, gender equal teaching environment in maths, which is not seen in all countries. So that's a very sort of clear result on the gender equality, as well as that high level of performance. We can also break down that performance further by looking at what are called the international achievement benchmarks. Now, these link those achievement scores of pupils internationally in Northern Ireland and in other countries, and it links those to the sort of tasks that students can complete. So it's taking that raw score, but then actually looking of, well, what abilities, what is it that pupils can do at those different levels? And I think that's really important because it brings that theoretical measure of performance at a national level down to real classroom experience and classroom capabilities of students. So, for example, the high benchmark here, that the sort of abilities that we're looking for students that achieve the high benchmark at maths would be to be able to apply a conceptual understanding to problem solving. And then that's extended further with the advanced international benchmark, where we're looking at applying it to more complex situations, but also providing explanations of their reasoning as they go. So you can see that there's a development of the mathematical ideas and how they're applied as you work up through these benchmarks. And these benchmarks can relate directly to questions or items, as we call them in the trade, that demonstrate the ability. So, for example, here is an advanced international benchmark question for maths. And we've got a large square here, and the question is that the square can be made by putting together smaller shapes. So we've got an array of different smaller shapes, and it's about relating the smaller shapes to the size of the bigger ones and working out how many can be fitted into the bigger square. So being able to answer that question correctly requires a conceptual understanding of different aspects of geometry in terms of understanding squares and triangles and rectangles, and applying that to a specific problem-solving context. So we're looking at that high advanced level of ability. So in Northern Ireland, 26% of pupils exceeded this international benchmark. 26% of pupils could answer items like this correctly and get the marks. Now that level was only exceeded by the 5 East Asian countries. Even the Russian Federation didn't reach that level. So that's a really good result for Northern Ireland, that at the highest possible benchmark, more than a quarter of all the pupils in Northern Ireland can achieve at that level. There were only 8 participating countries that reached even the 20% level for that particular benchmark. And that's also seen if we look here at an item from the high benchmark. So we had the advanced benchmark, level slightly below that is the high benchmark. In the high benchmark item, we've got here, it's about conceptual understanding to solve a problem. So we've got a problem here about 2 people one filling the tank with water, one taking water out. And it's not about getting the correct answer, it's about the conceptual framework of how do I set up an equation, how do I set up an expression to work out what that correct answer is. So 60% of pupils in Northern Ireland achieved the high benchmark. That's well over half of all the pupils in Northern Ireland can achieve what's internationally described as a high benchmark in mathematics ability. And only 10 participating countries actually had over 50% out of the 58 participating countries. So again, this is a very positive position for Northern Ireland in mathematics. And it means, you know, we've got the majority of pupils can do activities that are at a high international standard. That's a very quick run through, and by the way, there are, if you look in the national report that we published, there are more examples of these items at the different benchmarks that you can look through and see how it relates to perhaps classroom abilities and classroom practice in your schools. But we'll also have a look now and have a look at some of the same analyses for the science results and see where that places Northern Ireland internationally. So for the science results, the average scale score here was a total of 518. Now obviously that's nearer to the center point that I talked about of 500. So this suggests that it's not quite as good performance as we've seen in the mathematics, but we'll explain a little bit around that as we go. But importantly, this score, there's Northern Ireland at the bottom of this list, so there are more countries that have exceeded Northern Ireland's performance, but the score is significantly higher than that international average. It does have the little up arrow next to it, so it is showing a good performance. And actually you can see, even though there are a number of countries above it, looking again at what I've said with the black space in the middle, in being the range in which the average lies, we can see it's actually similar to quite a lot of these countries around Northern Ireland's performance. The other bars, by the way, indicate the full spread of the results, and you can actually see here that Northern Ireland's performance in science is a little narrower overall than it is for some of the other countries, although there is variation in that as they go. So again, let's have a look about where that places Northern Ireland in comparison to the other participating countries. So this time Northern Ireland in science was significantly exceeded, their score was significantly exceeded by 18 countries. So this time this includes the high-performing East Asian countries, but also includes European countries such as Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Sweden, and also we've got England and the Republic of Ireland in there, as well as sort of the United States, Australia, various other countries. So there are countries doing significantly better than Northern Ireland in science, but also taking this idea that we're looking at really those blocks of comparable performance. There is in fact a sort of a large, what I've called a midfield block of 11 countries. Northern Ireland is here. 11 countries which actually performed basically the same as Northern Ireland. The scores might have been slightly above or slightly below, but given that sampling uncertainty, they performed effectively the same as Northern Ireland. And that includes countries such as Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany. Northern Ireland also scored significantly better than pupils from all of the other 28 participating countries, and that includes countries such as New Zealand, France, Spain, and Italy. So it's a good job, but it's not up to the heights that we've seen with the mathematics, but it is a good solid performance internationally for Northern Ireland in science. Again, as with maths, the results have been stable in science since Northern Ireland participated in TIMSS, with again no significant difference in those numbers, and in fact very little difference at all. Really, that performance has been quite stable, and a very striking gender similarity here, where you can barely tell the difference at all between the performance of boys and girls in science. Again, underlining the very strong gender equality in primary school teaching in Northern Ireland. And obviously that's seen over all three administrations of the TIMSS study in Northern Ireland. And again, as with the maths, there is a set of international benchmarks against which to compare that that performance, and that these highlight, as I said, the specific capabilities and how this relates to actual learning practice of students, of pupils in the class. So again, similarly, the high benchmark again is about sort of applying knowledge of life, physical and earth sciences to a scenario, to a particular situation. And then for the advanced benchmark, that introduces ideas of the process of scientific inquiry and how to unpack experiments and explain what goes on in there. And that's exemplified in the first example of an advanced benchmark item that I have here. This is an example where this is an advanced benchmark. So we've got an experiment. Here they've got dissolving sugar under different circumstances at different temperatures, with stirring, with different sizes of cubes. And the students have to apply their scientific knowledge to predict what the outcome of the experiment will be, clicking on the A or B as to which one will dissolve faster. And also what they have to do is explain an aspect of scientific inquiry. So here we've got a question at the bottom about a control variable, the amount of water, and they have to explain their understanding. So that brings in this extra point in the advanced benchmark in science, demonstrating knowledge of the process of scientific inquiry. So in Northern Ireland, 5% of pupils achieved this advanced benchmark in science. And as I said, that compares to 26% in maths who achieved the advanced benchmark. So there is a difference there between the two subjects. But having said that, the internationally fewer countries actually, or pupils in fewer countries actually did exceed those international benchmarks in science. So only 2 countries had at least 20% of pupils actually achieving that benchmark, so achieving the 20%. But as you can see, Northern Ireland is a bit below that on that particular scale. And again, if we look at the high benchmark, we've got the applying your knowledge to a particular circumstance. In this case, it's applying knowledge of Earth and space to the appearance of the moon in 2 different pictures taken at different times. And again, you've got to select your answer and write an explanation. This time it's more based on scientific understanding than it is on scientific inquiry skills. So it does recognize that those scientific inquiry skills are a higher level of analysis. 35% of pupils in Northern Ireland achieved this high benchmark, and actually again sort of indicating only 6% of participating countries had at least half of their pupils at that level. That compared to 10 countries in maths. So again, those benchmarks are a little bit harder to achieve in science internationally. That's not just an effect seen in Northern Ireland. So that's a pretty quick taste of some of the wide detail that's contained in the TIMSS results about performance at the subject. There is a lot more contained both in the national report that we published in December on the Northern Ireland results, but also the international report that was published by the IEA at the same time. And there are lots more ways to break down that data, for example, between subject areas, what we call cognitive domains of do they involve basic understanding or problem solving or reasoning. It's broken down all of those. It's also further broken down by gender, etc. So there are a lot of ways that that information is broken down with comparisons of all of those countries. So if you are interested, there is a lot of resource there to go and have a look and find out more information. But I think the full power of TIMSS comes from being able to link that pupil achievement data to a varied set of home and classroom influences on pupils and their education. And as I've said, there were 4 questionnaires completed by principals, teachers, parents, and the pupils themselves. We'll have a look at some of the factors that were highlighted in those and how they might inform on the maths and science achievement that we've seen. So firstly, from the questionnaires that were provided to the principals and teachers, people like yourselves who are listening, we can learn about the school learning environment. And what the IEA do when they process the results of the questionnaire data is they build those questionnaire responses into scale. So there will be a whole series of questions about the classroom environment that are asked to, I think most of them in this case come from teachers, but the first one comes from principals, and it builds those responses into different classes based on whether the response is a positive or a not so positive response. And those are called international scales that they provide, and they can rank each country on those international scales by the sort of modal response that they get from each of the participants. And that classifies the learning environment and allows us to compare them across the different countries. And when we do that, we sort of have a sort of definition, if you like, of the school learning environment in Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland, by doing this scale approach, is a country identified as having a high emphasis on academic success, hardly any problems with school discipline, and very safe and orderly classrooms. So that's all very positive. There is some teaching limited by pupils who are not ready for instruction, and that is slightly higher than we see in other similar countries. But pupils' experience of bullying behaviours is low, with never or almost never. Bullying does occur, but it is not as big a problem as it is in some other countries internationally. And I think what's reassuring is especially the sort of the emphasis on academic success scale and the safe and orderly classroom scale, where Northern Ireland perform better than other comparative high-performing comparator countries. The one area that perhaps could look as an area for development along this is teaching limited by pupils who were not ready for instruction. And there were sort of 2 areas within this that sort of came out from the analysis, which is pupils, first of all, who were turning up to lessons not quite prepared for the lesson. Either they hadn't, that's the prerequisite knowledge and skills, sorry, there. So either they'd sort of not prepared properly for the lesson, or perhaps were sort of lacking in some of the skills required for that particular lesson. So there's a little bit about preparing for the lesson from the pupil's point of view. And the other issue that came up quite strongly is pupils suffering from not enough sleep. And this was identified as being a larger issue in Northern Ireland than internationally, and has become a bigger issue over time. It has increased since 2015, when this last study was done. Now, I find that quite interesting, because I did a talk at a Northern Ireland Policy Forum meeting a couple of years ago, talking about the TIMSS 2015 results then. And in the discussion that we had at the end of it with school teachers and school principals, students not getting enough sleep was anecdotally a problem that they wanted to talk about. And it's very interesting to see, having spotted that anecdotally a couple of years ago, to actually see that come up in the international results from TIMSS a couple of years later. So Northern Ireland, and this is something that Faustina also mentioned, we can also look at the teaching time allocated to maths and science. And Northern Ireland delivers significantly more than the international average for mathematics. The international average is 154 hours a year. Northern Ireland delivers 203 hours a year in mathematics, but significantly less than that average for science. So the international average is 73, and Northern Ireland delivers 38 hours. So only 7 countries internationally spent more time on teaching maths. Only 3 countries, including the Republic of Ireland, spend less time on teaching science. So that again puts that science and maths difference into a context of the resources, the teaching time devoted to it. Another sort of reference in terms of science is that science practical activities. So the number of pupils whose teachers emphasize science practical activities was 14% in 2019. And that's lower than the international average. But interestingly, this has increased since 2015, when it was as low as 3%. So it has increased proportionally quite a lot. In 2015, NFER and SEER identified this as an area of concern, and we actually published some practical ideas for lesson plans that are available free to use on the SEER website. So it's possible that these might have had some effect in doing that, in feeding into that improvement. And I think that's an example of where we have worked to take the results from a TIMSS study and actually see where that can be applied to deliver benefits for pupils. One thing that did stand out is that, again, in terms of practical science, is that no pupils in Northern Ireland have a science laboratory, and that was the case for 2017. Internationally, quite a lot of countries do have science laboratories in primary school, except also for the Republic of Ireland, which was not quite as low, but also had a low level. So there is the possibility there that the emphasis on science activities is a bit lower, in science practical activities is a bit lower, but possibly improving in Northern Ireland. And as I said before, that links perhaps to that higher benchmark that we've seen before in the performance. So as a sort of quick summary, in mathematics, in terms of recognizing success, there's a clear strength with mathematics in Northern Ireland. It's been good sustained performance overall. It's against the benchmarks, it's good. There's a positive learning environment, and pupils reported strong instructional clarity in maths, that they were very, what teachers delivered was very clear. Developmentally, again, I'm going through this now very quickly. There's a lot of results published in the report, but pupil enjoyment and confidence is a bit lower than internationally average, but that is true of all high-performing countries. And the teachers report slightly lower job satisfaction than internationally average. And I'll talk a little bit later about the integrating technology as a training need. And this is a good news story for Northern Ireland, and it has been reported as such when we released the results in December. But the science is by no means a poor news story either. Performance is above the international average, comparable to many similar countries like Canada, Denmark, Netherlands, Germany. And pupils really enjoy science. They enjoy it more than mathematics and more than the international average for science. And also, I think an important point, which I've put at the bottom here, is that science is taught in the context of the world around us curriculum. And so any appraisal of science teaching in Northern Ireland also needs to look at the impact and consequences on the other important areas of instruction, such as geography and history. That it's not necessarily just about focusing on science, but how the whole education of these pupils in that important area develop. Teaching time for science is lower than the international average, but they're delivering an above average impact on top of that. And actually, there's quite a poor relationship between teaching time and performance internationally. So it's not the amount of time you teach, it's how good that teaching is that's important. And practical science is an area that may be impacted by that teaching time, especially at that sort of high benchmark, which looks at those science investigative skills. So that's probably where I'd end my presentation if it wasn't for one thing, which is since this study was done, everything's changed. And we've then had the COVID pandemic and a significant disruption to the educational background. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes trying to see, is there anything that TIMSS can tell us about how well Northern Ireland will recover from COVID learning loss? And that's hoping, fingers crossed, that we are now recovering from that and we are coming out of that, and how well Northern Ireland compares internationally. So TIMSS 2019 study happened before COVID, and so provides us with a very good benchmark, a baseline really of the state of teaching and learning in Northern Ireland before there was any disruption. And we have no direct measure of COVID preparedness, but we can look at some factors in the home and school questionnaires about resilience that might help us move beyond COVID, and how Northern Ireland compares internationally. Nobody thought to include questions in the questionnaire in 2019 about responding to global pandemics, unfortunately. These are home factors that are reported in the home learning questionnaire, and they show that the access of to computers that pupils have at home, and the access to internet connections. And we can see there's a positive view for Northern Ireland above the international average, with 96 and 99% of pupils stating on the questionnaire that they have access to these facilities. So that's a positive result, and the pluses here means it's better than the international average. We also have 35% of pupils with many home resources for learning on that scale, and I explained the scales before, and that's significantly above the international average. And we also have good support of pupils before primary school. That's not a direct measure of their support during primary school, but it is a sort of proxy measure of the level of support that parents give to pupils at home. So given that there has been so much homeschooling and pupils having to access information online, this suggests that Northern Ireland is in a better position than other countries to respond to the learning loss. But there is an important caveat, and that is that these factors that we look at are also factors that we sort of link to deprivation and the difference between pupils of different socioeconomic statuses. So those with many home resources already in the TIMSS year scored significantly better. I think it was 64 points better in maths than those without them. And the COVID situation may well make that a bit worse. That there is already a learning gap between this group and pupils who don't have those resources. COVID is emphasizing the use of these resources. So that may well be an issue going forward of how that works. In schools, this is pre-COVID again, but pupils had familiarity with learning activities on digital platforms, especially in maths. So that's a positive. Less so in science, but it's about the international average. As I've already said, there was high clarity of instruction in maths in Northern Ireland, which means hopefully that can come over with some of the remote teaching that might have been happening. And pupils very much like learning science, which might make them enthusiastic, but less so in maths, which might pose an issue for their motivation for independent learning. One last thing to sort of go through is teacher development. And again, this is something that Faustina mentioned in her presentation. Teachers were asked about their professional development needs. And one thing that stood out from that is internationally, integrating technology into instruction was the largest training need for both mathematics and science. And that's something that's seen in Northern Ireland as well. So participation in professional development in this area was low. So about international average in maths are teachers getting training in this, but the need is greater, and that gap is even greater in science. This is an international problem. A lot of teaching will have moved online. I think a lot more teaching is likely to be using those technological platforms. And internationally, there is a big need from teachers for support in this, and that is also reflected in Northern Ireland. So my last slide, I think I'm about a minute or two over time, but my last slide just sort of summarizes that picture of learning loss resilience in TIMSS. So Northern Ireland is better placed than many countries to support learning at home, but those resources that support that learning, it needs to be careful that we look at areas of different socioeconomic status, because that resilience to learning may be different in areas of deprivation, and that's where the support may need to be provided. At schools, this is looking at sort of what pupils had done previously and where they might be placed going forward. That pupils are already familiar with digital learning resources, or were, hopefully they are now more. We will see soon what impact that has as they are now coming back to school. High clarity of instruction in maths, possibly more enthusiastic about learning science than English, than maths, which might be something that they see in home learning environments, and that there is this teaching need for technology to be developed so that teachers are more familiar with that, if indeed they're not now more familiar anyway by having to access platforms in a way that they hadn't expected. So I'll just finish there. That's a very quick tour of the Northern Ireland results, but I hope it's given you a sort of taste of some of the depth and breadth of the information that we can take out, and that there are many more avenues that can be pursued in that. But I hope that's a useful presentation for you, and I think we now move on, Bethan, to the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, David. That was a really good in-depth presentation on what are very wide-ranging results from TIMSS. Huge breadth in the data there. Thank you very much. I'll let David catch his breath momentarily while we compile the questions for the question and answer session. And first of all, we're going to look at maths, I think. And so one question we've got here are, what are the high-performing countries doing in maths that might be used within Northern Ireland? David, I don't know whether you would like to start with some of the evidence from the TIMSS findings.
Okay, I did have a brief look at this. I think one thing that came up that was interesting is the looking at what I referred to as the cognitive domains, which is the different levels at which the work is presented. I'm just going to, just for my own benefit, click on something here. And that what we see in those high performing Asian countries is that actually they perform better at knowing skills. So the three cognitive domains that it divides into are knowing, applying, and reasoning. And we tend to think of the applying and reasoning as the higher cognitive skills. But actually what we see is that all of those countries at the top do better in the basic skills, the knowing skills, than in others. And what's clear on when you sort of look at the international graph there, that it's only the top performing countries that do that. And that feeds into the idea of sort of mastery, that what's important is that students do the basics first and then use that as a basis to develop up. Now, Northern Ireland is one of the few countries not in that top group that did show that, but to a lesser extent. So I think it would be interesting to hear, especially from the ETI team, whether that's something that's seen in Northern Ireland schools, and have that sort of the mastery approach of making sure that students have that foundation before moving on. The other thing that also came out a little bit is that certainly Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taipei were at the top of participating in CPD activities for teachers. So that's another area where they saw. But as I said, actually, teaching time was not particularly a factor. That the teaching time varied a lot across that group. And one thing possibly to avoid from what they do is that they scored very poorly in, which perhaps not surprising, in teacher and pupil satisfaction. So that perhaps that trying to push students a bit further, a bit too far, and teachers doesn't create a happy learning system. And perhaps Northern Ireland has a, trying to maintain that positivity, I think, is really important to what Northern Ireland does.
Okay, so I'd like to invite Maura from ETI if she'd like to come in on that.
Yes, thank you, Bethan, and thank you, David, for your presentation. I think when we speak about the higher performing countries, what they're doing in maths, and certainly for us here in Northern Ireland, I think we first need to recognise and acknowledge the work, the great work and achievements that our children have shown through the study. And we're trying to get a balance in our curriculum, and maybe Lynn will expand a little bit further in relation to this, in relation to the Northern Ireland curriculum, a balance between the high academic attainment and the holistic development of the child as well too. And we see that even though that some of those countries that have outperformed us in particular aspects, and David, you very clearly outlined those Asian countries as well too, where that focus is on their knowledge. One of the aspects that I was interested in, and when we looked a little bit deeper and delved deeper into some of the statistics there of those countries, they're outperforming Northern Ireland children in the reasoning skills aspect, which I find quite interesting. But on the other side of that, looking at the statistics, and another pleasing factor for our children was that reasoning skills element has seen an increase from 2015 for our children to the statistics that were outlined in the 2019 study. So that's a pleasing approach, and I suppose I'm thinking about, what does that actually mean? What do reasoning skills actually mean? And I know in terms of the questions that are presented, there are different categories here, but if we widen it out for our high quality curriculum that we have, yes, our maths is across processes, number, measures, shape and space, handling data, all of those aspects, but the processes have to be incorporated right across all of those key elements of maths for us and for the delivery of mathematics for our children. And I think it's important that the children that are presented with our curriculum, the processes are focusing on how the children learn rather than the content. And I think in terms of our achievements compared to the Asian countries, for example, it's about knowledge for the Asian, and it's about that mastery, as you're mentioning there, David. But for our children, it's about how they learn, the explanation of their work, and the discussion around that as well, to the experiences that they're having and the challenges that they're presented with, and to learn that they actually learn from their mistakes And I think there was a statistic there as well too that mentioned about the processes that teachers use here in Northern Ireland, and that was a high level of discussion included in, if I'm right, David, in the statistics that I was looking at, there's a lot of discussion included in the delivery of maths in particular. And I think it's about, in our sense, honing in on that, thinking about how can we do this even better? What about building on those opportunities, even in the foundation stage that we have, the strong focus on that play-based learning, moving into activity-based learning, and continuing that into our Key Stage 2 children who are in Year 6, to give them a chance for that experiential learning, and I suppose that will link in a little bit more into the investigative side of science. But I think what we're seeing here, and some of those statistics and key findings that I was pulling out, and what you have presented us, David, with, is an opportunity for our schools to reflect, both the schools that took part in the study itself, how they performed against those international countries, but also for all of our schools, reflecting on how do we develop those skills in our children? Can we use, for example, evaluative tools like the inspection self-evaluation framework, the ISIF, to reflect on the provision, reflect on the outcomes, and try and enhance that further with our children as well? And maybe Lynn might want to add a little bit more. I'm not sure whether she wants to add anything further in relation to the curriculum point of view there, but you know, there are pleasing statistics and pleasing trends being established here from our Year 6 children.
Thanks, Marek. If I could maybe just pick up on a couple of things. And I suppose for me, the two things that struck out in the maths were that perhaps our children didn't enjoy it as much and they weren't as confident. So for me, and because I have an early years background, you know, those for me are so core. And the importance of the step-by-step teaching so that children actually really understand. I mean, I do think, and everyone has said about our outstanding curriculum, but the understanding, the application in real life situations across the curriculum. And so I suppose for me, a big thing would be the enjoyment and the confidence and reflection on that from the very beginning, from preschool through play-based learning into foundation stage and beyond. I mean, I do think that we have got many things right, but for me, that just caused me to reflect on what we're actually doing that children enjoy and feel confident in maths.
And yet, Lynn, just on that as well too, that they, even though they're not enjoying the maths as much, which is a shame, and in terms of my mathematical background as well, I find that disappointing, but it hasn't impacted on their attainment. And what I would nearly be thinking is when they see how the attitude and their enjoyment of science is quite strong there, even for some of, in comparison to some of the Asian countries as well too, how can we harness that and pull forward and drive forward in that? What's happening in the science? What are the approaches that are being used there? What are the delivery methods and the pedagogy behind the science that's making it so exciting and interesting for the children? And can that be shared and you know, taken apart in terms of learning going forward? But yes, I agree with you, Lynn, in terms of the maths and the slightly disappointing that they didn't enjoy it just as much.
Thank you all very much. Oh, shall we move on to science then, as we're sort of gradually moving towards that? So we've got a question here. What are the panelists' views on the effect of the introduction of a world around us area of learning as part of the Northern Ireland curriculum in relation to achievement in science? I don't know who wants to take that first. Lynn, is that one for you?
Yes, I think yes. So the world around us is part of, as we know, one of our areas of learning in the Northern Ireland curriculum. And so it's a very broad, balanced curriculum. I do think that the practical aspect of science is there as well. I think we have provided materials to support TIMSS, as David has alluded to, in 2015. So we have the materials there from the practical aspect of science. We've also got materials for science through stories and other work that we have completed collaboratively then with ETI. Would you like to add anything on that one, Mara?
Yes, I think, Lynn, just in terms of what you're saying, I suppose we need to consider, and David has already set this in context as well too, that science for our children is embedded within the world around us. I suppose when you reflect on it and think about how that is delivered, it's an inquiry-based learning, and inquiry-based learning is the core of that world around us, which I suppose on reflection, and you look at how maybe the lower level of investigative aspect of science is not just as pleasing. But again, if you want to dig deeper into those statistics, we're seeing an increase from the last time round at 2015. So yes, maybe, Lynn, those designed resources and support resources have had a positive impact there as well. And I think whenever you reflect on our curriculum and our world around us curriculum, there is that flexibility, and Festina mentioned it in her opening remarks as well too. There's a balance here between the flexibility and the prescriptive aspect of the curriculum. It is a statutory aspect of our curriculum. However, there is a flexibility there for teachers to deliver aspects of that, balancing it up between the science and the geography and the history. But it is their responsibility and schools' responsibility to provide a broad and balanced curriculum. And that includes the world around us, and that includes the balance across those three complementary elements within that as well too. Interestingly, we had in 2015, ETI conducted a very detailed world around us evaluation. And although it's over 5 years old now, the evidence that was gathered there was from 35% of our primary schools. And at that stage, there were about 2/3 of those schools who had world around us as a priority on their school development plan. And in addition to the host of lesson observations that were undertaken, discussions with leaders and teachers, and indeed hearing from the child themselves, the report also recommended a few aspects on moving forward in the area of world around us, and I think that they are still quite relevant. And that 2 of them in particular were for schools to plan for the world around us programme and using the time available for learning to connect effectively those linkages between the developing of skills and their knowledge in meaningful contexts. And the other, very interestingly, was to provide more investigative and inquiry-based work to link with that as well too. So I think those are maybe particular aspects, together with the findings from the TIMSS, that schools can consider in going forward. And maybe one last little bit in terms of the science and the maths apparent disparity in terms of our children's attainment, is that the teachers recognised the higher proportion of time spent on the delivery of maths than on science, and they also identified that there were probably a greater percentage of the mathematics topics through TIMSS taught than those of the science. So I think we need to bear that in mind when we look at the perceived challenge or difference in the attainment for maths and science.
David, I think you wanted to come in here.
I think Karen had her hand up first if she wants to go before me.
Sorry, Karen, do you want to jump in then?
Yes, it was just to pick up on the point that we were talking about there about the last time that we'd used the information from TIMSS and the feedback from that World Around Us report done by ETI colleagues to develop those practical science kind of resources for use in the classroom. I wonder, moving forward, is it something that worth us finding out more about how effective those have been from the schools that have used them, and we use that to refine and develop resources as well? It's just to put that.
Okay, I think David, you, and then Lynn, and then we probably should move on to another question.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the point that had been made about the sort of the world around us and some of the skills that are involved in that. And I think Maura pointed out that the reasoning skills had improved in maths, but they've also improved in science, and those reasoning skills can be developed in activities that they're doing in history and geography as well as science. So a little bit of the time devoted to science that's reported, you know, whereas there's a specific science time that has been recorded, but there are developmental activities and cognitive development around that with the world around us that are sort of contributing. So it may present a slightly starker picture than is really there, that some of those skills developed in those other areas are feeding into that science development.
Lynn, it's over to you for the last comments on this one.
And I suppose from a SCA perspective, we need to be better at promoting our resources. Karen, picking up on what you have said, I suppose in the past, CAS service would have done a lot of work with schools and promoting our resources for us. But now, you know, we're in the position where we need to be more proactive ourselves and actually drawing attention to the wealth of materials that are on the website that will address some of these concerns. And indeed, as you say, evaluating them to see how useful they have been and where we go to next. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you all very much for that really comprehensive response. We've got a question here from our participants, so saying we've looked at a lot at the highest achieving pupils, but what about those who are not performing at the same level? Is there any evidence of this from the results of Northern Ireland, the gap between the social classes, so between the advantaged and the disadvantaged? So is there a significant range between the highest and the lowest attaining students in TIMSS? I don't know who wants to take this one, looking at disadvantage and achievement.
I think when I saw it, I think the study sent quite a positive message about the strategies that are in place, you know, within schools to address some traditional gaps. So we saw there's no gender gap, and that gap between most affluent and more disadvantaged was smaller in Northern Ireland than, you know, scores across other countries, that gap, and also that the absolute scores themselves, you know, for those groups were higher, particularly for our most disadvantaged learners, and I wonder, does that point to the resilience of our pupils who are better able to overcome that, and are there things that we can learn, as you say, maybe, you know, from the study, the examination of other countries, what kind of strategies they put in place to address disadvantage and support those learners.
David, do you have anything you want to feed in from the results?
I was just having a quick scroll through the different some of the different graphs I've got here. That I think in maths, and perhaps not surprisingly, there's a bigger spread of achievement, but it's not significantly bigger than it is for other countries. So I think that sort of puts them on a that the difference between the highest performing and the lowest performing isn't that much bigger in maths, and I think in science we said it was slightly narrower level. And just looking, the important thing, so if we look at the low benchmark, there are 4% of pupils in Northern Ireland who don't reach the low benchmark in maths, which is higher than some of the other high performing countries. And it's a low number, but there is a small minority of people who are really, I guess, pupils who are not accessing the curriculum meaningfully at all. And that's 6% in science, but again, that varies a lot in science across the countries, whereas in maths it tends to be that much higher. So there may be something to look at the very sort of the lower end of achievement, but broadly it's not hugely different from other countries.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we've got time for one more question. And given the audience, it's probably good to have a look at priorities for teacher development. So I wonder if the panel could think about, what does TIMSS suggest about the priorities for teacher development in maths and science? I don't know who wants to take that one first. Or is that an ETI one?
Yeah, I could come in there, Beth, and if you like, and I think, and again, I think there needs to be a recognition for that high quality learning and teaching that has been identified and recognised in our participating schools. But yet there are aspects of continuous professional development that have been identified by those teachers participating. In particular, looking at the integration of IT into the delivery of science and maths. But pleasing has been that, quite a high percentage of our teachers, have, particularly in maths, have accessed or had access prior to the survey CPD for problem solving and critical thinking. And again, has that had that influence and the desired effect for our children in raising those reasoning skills and the development of their skills there. But I think, and again, both Festina and Mark mentioned in their opening remarks as well too, that they're to deliver that high quality, high level of our curriculum, we need a highly qualified workforce as well too. And yes, while many of our teachers access and seek out their own personal professional development, and that might be within their own school or from external deliverers, but also what is, how does that manifest itself over all of our schools? Is it equitable across our schools? Just to happen to be where you are? And of course, we can't forget about the teacher professional learning strategy as well too, in relation to that. And again, it's the development of our staff and the body of our staff right through from that initial teacher education. Are they getting what is required from them? Christina mentioned about maybe an overemphasis on literacy and numeracy there at that stage. How can we ensure that there is the approach that's required to lead those young teachers through their career path and have that continuous professional development there? Interestingly, some of our top performing countries also were at that top level of CPD, accessing CPD. So for us, as an education system here, what is it that they're accessing? What does their continuous professional development look like, and what can we learn ourselves from that as well too, to ensure that we have those highly skilled teachers across all of our schools, so that each one of our children gets the diet of the Northern Ireland curriculum as well.
That's great, thank you, Maura. Lynn, I think you wanted to come in on that as well.
Yeah, just picking up on a couple of things there that Maura said. I suppose for me, the role of the coordinator in this, sort of the world around us coordinator, the maths coordinator, the learning leader strategy then, and, every teacher being a leader of learning, but particularly those who are coordinators. And I think maybe this is where ISEF sets out very clearly at that middle management level, the responsibility of coordinators. So I think all of that coming together, and of course in the situation we're in with COVID and so on, it hasn't been possible, but in time I think the embedding of all of that as we move forward will be really useful. No one knows better what each school needs other than the teachers who actually teach in that school, because every context is different. So that broad brush approach of this is what everyone needs for the world around us or maths isn't appropriate. So it's that maybe of being more reactive to the local situation where schools find themselves and helping them to take themselves forward, and professional support across schools where they could cluster together to do that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. So I think that was the last question we've got time for. So I'd just like to close what's been a very successful webinar and very positive, really celebrating the successes of Northern Ireland primary school children in maths and science. And I think it really speaks to something that comes through for me in the TIMSS results about this aspirational nature. The teachers and pupils are aspirational. They want to achieve more and they want to get better. And that includes right across the board, disadvantaged children, looking at how we can improve their performance, how teachers want to increase their professional development so they can do the best that they can do. And I think that TIMSS gives us a really good benchmark. It happened way before anybody could have imagined there was going to be a pandemic, but it gives us a great benchmark of where we are resilient, areas where we need to grow and improve in order to become more resilient to take on future challenges. I think it's really useful in looking forward. What really came through to me, and it's probably where we're coming from now, is this need to talk closely, to meet with people, to find out what schools' individual needs are, what pupils' individual needs are, and what teachers' individual needs are. And hopefully it won't be long till we can be sat around staff rooms and head teachers' offices having those conversations face to face. Thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful webinar. Hope to see you soon.